The Supreme Court of the United States, sometimes colloquially referred to by the acronym SCOTUS, is the highest federal court of the United States. Established pursuant to Article 3 of the United States Constitution in 1789, it has ultimate, and largely discretionary, appellate jurisdiction over all federal courts and state court cases involving issues of federal law plus original jurisdiction over a small range of cases. In the legal system of the United States, the Supreme Court is generally the final interpreter of federal law including the United States Constitution, but it may act only within the context of a case in which it has jurisdiction. The court may decide cases having political overtones but does not have power to decide non-justiciable political questions, and its enforcement arm is in the executive rather than judicial branch of government. According to federal statute, the court normally consists of the Chief Justice of the United States and 8 associate justices who are nominated by the President and confirmed by the Senate. Once appointed, justices have lifetime tenure unless they resign, retire, or are removed after impeachment, though no justice has ever been removed. In modern discourse, the justices are often categorized as having conservative, moderate, or liberal philosophies of law and of judicial interpretation. Each justice has one vote, and it is worth noting that while a far greater number of cases in recent history have been decided unanimously, decisions in cases of the highest profile have often come down to just one single vote, thereby exposing the justices' ideological beliefs that track with those philosophical or political categories. The court meets in the Supreme Court building in Washington, D.C. History. The ratification of the United States Constitution established the Supreme Court in 1789. Its powers are detailed in Article 3 of the Constitution. The Supreme Court was the only court specifically established by the Constitution while all other federal courts were created by Congress. Congress is also responsible for conferring the title of justice to its members, who are known to scold lawyers for inaccurately referring to them as judge, even though it is the term used in the Constitution. The court first convened on February 2, 1790, with 6 judges where only 5 of its 6 initial positions were filled. According to historian Fergus Bordwich, in its first session, the Supreme Court convened for the first time at the Royal Exchange Building on Broad Street, a few steps from Federal Hall. Symbolically, the moment was pregnant with promise for the Republic, this birth of a new national institution whose future power, admittedly, still existed only in the eyes and minds of just a few visionary Americans. Impressively bewigged and swathed in their robes of office, Chief Justice John Jay and 3 Associate Justices William Cushing of Massachusetts, James Wilson of Pennsylvania, and John Blair of Virginia sat augustly before a throng of spectators and waited for something to happen. Nothing did. They had no cases to consider. After a week of inactivity, they adjourned until September, and everyone went home. The 6th member, James Iredell, was not confirmed until May 12, 1790. Because the full court had only 6 members, every decision that it made by a majority was also made by 2/3, voting 4-2. However, Congress has always allowed less than the court's full membership to make decisions, starting with a quorum of 4 justices in 1789. Earliest beginnings to Marshall. Under Chief Justices J. Rutledge and Ellsworth, 1789-1801, the court heard few cases. Its first decision was West v. Barnes, 1791, a case involving a procedural issue. The court lacked a home of its own and had little prestige, a situation not helped by the highest profile case of the era, Chisholm v. Georgia, 1793, which was reversed within 2 years by the adoption of the 11th Amendment. The court's power and prestige grew substantially during the Marshall Court, 1801-35. Under Marshall, the court established the power of judicial review over acts of Congress, including specifying itself as the supreme expositor of the Constitution, Marbury v. Madison, and made several important constitutional rulings giving shape and substance to the balance of power between the federal government and the states, prominently, Martin v. Hunter's lessee, McCulloch v. Maryland and Gibbons v. Ogden. The Marshall Court also ended the practice of each justice issuing his opinion seriatim, a remnant of British tradition, and instead issuing a single majority opinion. Also during Marshall's tenure, although beyond the court's control, the impeachment and acquittal of Justice Samuel Chase in 1804-05 helped cement the principle of judicial independence. From Taney to Taft. The Taney Court, 1836-64, made several important rulings, such as Sheldon v. Sill, which held that while Congress may not limit the subjects the Supreme Court may hear, it may limit the jurisdiction of the lower federal courts to prevent them from hearing cases dealing with certain subjects. Nevertheless, it is primarily remembered for its ruling in Dred Scott v. Sandford, which helped precipitate the Civil War. In the Reconstruction era, the Chase, Waite, and Fuller courts, 1864-1910, interpreted the new Civil War amendments to the Constitution and developed the doctrine of substantive due process, Lochner v. New York, Adair v. United States. Under the White and Taft courts, 1910-30, the court held that the 14th Amendment had incorporated some guarantees of the Bill of Rights against the states. Gitlow v. New York, grappled with the new antitrust statutes. Standard Oil Co. of New Jersey v. United States, upheld the constitutionality of military conscription, selective draft law cases, and brought the substantive due process doctrine to its first apogee, Adkins v. Children's Hospital. The New Deal era. During the Hughes, Stone, and Vinson courts, 1930-53, the court gained its own accommodation in 1935 and changed its interpretation of the Constitution, giving a broader reading to the powers of the federal government to facilitate President Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal, most prominently West Coast Hotel Co. v. Parrish, Wickard v. Filburn, United States v. Darby and United States v. Butler. During World War II, the court continued to favor government power, upholding the internment of Japanese citizens, Korematsu v. United States, and the mandatory Pledge of Allegiance, Minersville School District v. Gobitis. Nevertheless, Gobitis was soon repudiated, West Virginia State Board of Education v. Barnett, and the steel seizure case restricted the pro-government trend. Warren and Burger. The Warren Court, 1953-69, dramatically expanded the force of constitutional civil liberties. It held that segregation in public schools violates equal protection, Brown v. Board of Education, Bolling v. Sharp and Green v. County School BD, and that traditional legislative district boundaries violated the right to vote, Reynolds v. Sims. It created a general right to privacy, Griswold v. Connecticut, limited the role of religion in public school, most prominently Engel v. Vital and Abington School District v. Skemp, incorporated most guarantees of the Bill of Rights against the states, prominently Mapp v. Ohio, the exclusionary rule, and Gideon v. Wainwright, right to appointed counsel, and required that criminal suspects be apprised of all these rights by police, Miranda v. Arizona. At the same time, however, the court limited defamation suits by public figures, New York Times v. Sullivan, and supplied the government with an unbroken run of antitrust victories. The Burger Court, 1969-86, marked a conservative shift. It also expanded Griswold's right to privacy to strike down abortion laws, Roe v. Wade, but divided deeply on affirmative action, Regents of the University of California v. Bakke, and campaign finance regulation, Buckley v. Valeo, and dithered on the death penalty, ruling first that most applications were defective, Furman v. Georgia, then that the death penalty itself was not unconstitutional, Gregg v. Georgia. Rehnquist and Roberts. The Rehnquist Court, 1986-2005, was noted for its revival of judicial enforcement of federalism, emphasizing the limits of the Constitution's affirmative grants of power, United States v. Lopez, and the force of its restrictions on those powers, Seminole Tribe v. Florida, City of Boerne v. Flores. It struck down single-sex state schools as a violation of equal protection, United States v. Virginia, laws against sodomy as violations of substantive due process, Lawrence v. Texas, and the line item veto, Clinton v. New York, but upheld school vouchers, Zelman v. Simmons Harris, and reaffirmed Roe's restrictions on abortion laws, Planned Parenthood v. Casey. The court's decision in Bush v. Gore, which ended the electoral recount during the presidential election of 2000, was especially controversial. The Roberts Court, 2005, present, is regarded by some as more conservative than the Rehnquist Court. Some of its major rulings have concerned federal preemption, Wyeth v. Levine, civil procedure, Twombly-Iqbal, abortion, Gonzales v. Carhart, climate change, Massachusetts v. EPA, same-sex marriage, United States v. Windsor and Obergefell v. Hodges, and the Bill of Rights, notably in Citizens United v. Federal Election Commission, First Amendment, Heller-MacDonald, Second Amendment, and Bays v. Rees, Eighth Amendment. Composition. Size of the court. Article 3 of the United States Constitution does not specify the number of justices. The Judiciary Act of 1789 called for the appointment of 6 judges. Although an 1801 Act would have reduced the size of the court to 5 members upon its next vacancy, an 1802 Act promptly negated the 1801 Act, legally restoring the court's size to 6 members before any such vacancy occurred. As the nation's boundaries grew, Congress added justices to correspond with the growing number of judicial circuits, 7 in 1807, 9 in 1837, and 10 in 1863. In 1866, at the behest of Chief Justice Chase, Congress passed an act providing that the next 3 justices to retire would not be replaced, which would thin the bench to 7 justices by attrition. Consequently, 1 seat was removed in 1866 and a second in 1867. In 1869, however, the Circuit Judges Act returned the number of justices to 9, where it has since remained. President Franklin D. Roosevelt attempted to expand the court in 1937. His proposal envisioned appointment of 1 additional justice for each incumbent justice who reached the age of 70 years 6 months and refused retirement, up to a maximum bench of 15 justices. The proposal was ostensibly to ease the burden of the docket on elderly judges, but the actual purpose was widely understood as an effort to pack the court with justices who would support Roosevelt's New Deal. The plan, usually called the Court Packing Plan, failed in Congress. Nevertheless, the court's balance began to shift within months when Justice Van Deventer retired and was replaced by Senator Hugo Black. By the end of 1941, Roosevelt had appointed 7 justices and elevated Harlan Fiske Stone to Chief Justice. Appointment and confirmation. The U.S. Constitution states that the President shall nominate, and by and with the advice and consent of the Senate, shall appoint judges of the Supreme Court. Most presidents nominate candidates who broadly share their ideological views, although a justice's decisions may end up being contrary to a president's expectations. Because the Constitution sets no qualifications for service as a justice, a president may nominate anyone to serve, subject to Senate confirmation. In modern times, the confirmation process has attracted considerable attention from the press and advocacy groups, which lobby senators to confirm or to reject a nominee depending on whether their track record aligns with the group's views. The Senate Judiciary Committee conducts hearings and votes on whether the nomination should go to the full Senate with a positive, negative, or neutral report. The committee's practice of personally interviewing nominees is relatively recent. The first nominee to appear before the committee was Harlan Fiske Stone in 1925, who sought to quell concerns about his links to Wall Street, and the modern practice of questioning began with John Marshall Harlan II in 1955. Once the committee reports out the nomination, the full Senate considers it. Rejections are relatively uncommon. The Senate has explicitly rejected 12 Supreme Court nominees, most recently Robert Bork, nominated by President Ronald Reagan in 1987. Although Senate rules do not necessarily allow a negative vote in committee to block a nomination, prior to 2017 a nomination could be blocked by filibuster once debate had begun in the full Senate. President Lyndon Johnson's nomination of sitting Associate Justice Abe Fortas to succeed Earl Warren as Chief Justice in 1968 was the first successful filibuster of a Supreme Court nominee. It included both Republican and Democratic senators concerned with Fortas's ethics. President Donald Trump's nomination of Neil Gorsuch to the seat vacated by Antonin Scalia was the second. Unlike the Fortas filibuster, however, only Democratic senators voted against cloture on the Gorsuch nomination, citing his perceived conservative judicial philosophy, and the Republican majority's prior refusal to take up President Barack Obama's nomination of Merrick Garland to fill the vacancy. This led the Republican majority to change the rules and eliminate the filibuster for Supreme Court nominations. Not every Supreme Court nominee has received a floor vote in the Senate. A president may withdraw a nomination before an actual confirmation vote occurs, typically because it is clear that the Senate will reject the nominee. This occurred most recently with the nomination of Harriet Miers in 2006. The Senate may also fail to act on a nomination, which expires at the end of the session. For example, President Dwight Eisenhower's first nomination of John Marshall Harlan II in November 1954 was not acted on by the Senate. Eisenhower renominated Harlan in January 1955, and Harlan was confirmed 2 months later. Most recently, as previously noted, the Senate failed to act on the March 2016 nomination of Merrick Garland. The nomination expired in January 2017, and the vacancy was later filled by President Trump's appointment of Neil Gorsuch. Once the Senate confirms a nomination, the President must prepare and sign a commission, to which the seal of the Department of Justice must be affixed, before the new justice can take office. The seniority of an associate justice is based on the commissioning date, not the confirmation or swearing-in date. Before 1981, the approval process of justices was usually rapid. From the Truman through Nixon administrations, justices were typically approved within 1 month. From the Reagan administration to the present, however, the process has taken much longer. Some believe this is because Congress sees justices as playing a more political role than in the past. According to the Congressional Research Service, the average number of days from nomination to final Senate vote since 1975 is 67 days, 2.2 months, while the median is 71 days, or 2.3 months. Recess appointments. When the Senate is in recess, a president may make temporary appointments to fill vacancies. Recess appointees hold office only until the end of the next Senate session, less than 2 years. The Senate must confirm the nominee for them to continue serving. Of the 2 Chief Justices and 11 Associate Justices who have received recess appointments, only Chief Justice John Rutledge was not subsequently confirmed. No president since Dwight D. Eisenhower has made a recess appointment to the court, and the practice has become rare and controversial even in lower federal courts. In 1960, after Eisenhower had made 3 such appointments, the Senate passed a sense of the Senate resolution that recess appointments to the court should only be made in unusual circumstances. Such resolutions are not legally binding but are an expression of Congress's views in the hope of guiding executive action. The 2014 Supreme Court ruling in National Labor Relations Board v. Noel Canning limited the ability of the President to make recess appointments, including appointments to the Supreme Court, ruling that the Senate decides when the Senate is in session, or in recess. Justice Breyer, writing for the court, stated, "We hold that, for purposes of the Recess Appointments Clause, the Senate is in session when it says it is, provided that, under its own rules, it retains the capacity to transact Senate business." This ruling allows the Senate to prevent recess appointments through the use of pro forma sessions. Tenure. The Constitution provides that justices shall hold their offices during good behavior, unless appointed during a Senate recess. The term good behavior is understood to mean justices may serve for the remainder of their lives, unless they are impeached and convicted by Congress, resign, or retire. Only one justice has been impeached by the House of Representatives, Samuel Chase, March 1804, but he was acquitted in the Senate, March 1805. Moves to impeach sitting justices have occurred more recently, For example, William O. Douglas was the subject of hearings twice, in 1953 and again in 1970, and Abe Fortas resigned while hearings were being organized in 1969, but they did not reach a vote in the House. No mechanism exists for removing a justice who is permanently incapacitated by illness or injury, but unable, or unwilling, to resign. Because justices have indefinite tenure, timing of vacancies can be unpredictable. Sometimes vacancies arise in quick succession, as in the early 1970s when Lewis Franklin Powell, Jr. and William Rehnquist were nominated to replace Hugo Black and John Marshall Harlan II, who retired within a week of each other. Sometimes a great length of time passes between nominations, such as the 11 years between Stephen Breyer's nomination in 1994 to succeed Harry Blackmun and the nomination of John Roberts in 2005 to fill the seat of Sandra Day O'Connor, though Roberts' nomination was withdrawn and resubmitted for the role of Chief Justice after Rehnquist died. Despite the variability, all but 4 presidents have been able to appoint at least one justice. William Henry Harrison died a month after taking office, though his successor, John Tyler, made an appointment during that presidential term. Likewise, Zachary Taylor died 16 months after taking office, but his successor, Millard Fillmore, also made a Supreme Court nomination before the end of that term. Andrew Johnson, who became president after the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, was denied the opportunity to appoint a justice by a reduction in the size of the court. Jimmy Carter is the only person elected president to have left office after at least one full term without having the opportunity to appoint a justice. Somewhat similarly, Presidents James Monroe, Franklin D. Roosevelt, and George W. Bush each served a full term without an opportunity to appoint a justice, but made appointments during their subsequent terms in office. No president who has served more than one full term has gone without at least one opportunity to make an appointment. 3 presidents have appointed justices who together served more than a century: Andrew Jackson, Abraham Lincoln, and Franklin D. Roosevelt. Membership. Current justices. The court is currently filled with 9 justices. The most recent justice to join to the court was Neil Gorsuch, who was nominated by President Donald Trump on January 31, 2017, and confirmed on April 7, 2017, by the U.S. Senate. Court demographics. The court currently has 6 male and 3 female justices. Among the 9 justices, there is 1 African American, Justice Thomas, and 1 Hispanic, Justice Sotomayor. 2 of the justices were born to at least 1 immigrant parent. Justice Alito's parents were born in Italy, and Justice Ginsburg's father was born in Russia. At least 5 justices are Roman Catholics and 3 are Jewish. It is unclear whether Neil Gorsuch considers himself a Catholic or an Episcopalian. The average age is 67 years and 4 months. Every current justice has an Ivy League background. 4 justices are from the state of New York, 2 from California, 1 from New Jersey, 1 from Georgia, and 1 from Colorado. In the 19th century, every justice was a man of European descent, usually Northern European, and almost always Protestant. Concerns about diversity focused on geography, to represent all regions of the country, rather than religious, ethnic, or gender diversity. Most justices have been Protestants, including 36 Episcopalians, 19 Presbyterians, 10 Unitarians, 5 Methodists, and 3 Baptists. The first Catholic justice was Roger Taney in 1836, and 1916 saw the appointment of the first Jewish justice, Louis Brandeis. Several Catholic and Jewish justices have since been appointed, and in recent years the situation has reversed. The court currently has at least 5 Catholic justices, and 3 Jewish justices. Racial, ethnic, and gender diversity began to increase in the late 20th century. Thurgood Marshall became the first African American justice in 1967. Sandra Day O'Connor became the first female justice in 1981. Marshall was succeeded by African American Clarence Thomas in 1991. O'Connor was joined by Ruth Bader Ginsburg in 1993. After O'Connor's retirement, Ginsburg was joined in 2009 by Sonia Sotomayor, the first Hispanic and Latina justice, and in 2010 by Elena Kagan, for a total of 4 female justices in the court's history. There have been 6 foreign-born justices in the court's history: James Wilson, 1789 to 1798, born in Caskardie, Scotland; James Iredell, 1790 to 1799, born in Lewes, England; William Patterson, 1793 to 1806, born in County Antrim, Ireland; David Brewer, 1889 to 1910, born in Smyrna, Turkey; George Sutherland, 1922 to 1939, born in Buckinghamshire, England; and Felix Frankfurter, 1939 to 1962, born in Vienna, Austria. Retired justices. There are currently 3 living retired justices of the Supreme Court of the United States: John Paul Stevens, Sandra Day O'Connor, and David Souter. As retired justices, they no longer participate in the work of the Supreme Court, but may be designated for temporary assignments to sit on lower federal courts, usually the United States Courts of Appeals. Such assignments are formally made by the Chief Justice, on request of the Chief Judge of the lower court and with the consent of the retired justice. In recent years, Justice O'Connor has sat with several courts of appeals around the country, and Justice Souter has frequently sat on the First Circuit, the court of which he was briefly a member before joining the Supreme Court. The status of a retired justice is analogous to that of a circuit or district court judge who has taken senior status, and eligibility of a Supreme Court justice to assume retired status, rather than simply resign from the bench, is governed by the same age and service criteria. In recent times, justices tend to strategically plan their decisions to leave the bench with personal, institutional, ideological, partisan, and sometimes even political factors playing a role. The fear of mental decline and death often motivates justices to step down. The desire to maximize the court's strength and legitimacy through one retirement at a time, when the court is in recess, and during non-presidential election years, suggests a concern for institutional health. Finally, especially in recent decades, many justices have timed their departure to coincide with a philosophically compatible president holding office, to ensure that a like-minded successor would be appointed. Seniority and seating. Many of the internal operations of the court are organized by seniority of justices. The Chief Justice is considered the most senior member of the court, regardless of the length of his or her service. The Associate Justices are then ranked by the length of their service. During court sessions, the justices sit according to seniority, with the Chief Justice in the center, and the Associate Justices on alternating sides, with the most senior Associate Justice on the Chief Justice's immediate right, and the most junior Associate Justice seated on the left farthest away from the Chief Justice. Therefore, the current court sits as follows from left to right: from the perspective of those facing the court: Kagan, Alito, Ginsburg, Kennedy, most senior Associate Justice, Roberts, Chief Justice, Thomas, Breyer, Sotomayor, and Gorsuch. In the official yearly court photograph, justices are arranged similarly, with the 5 most senior members sitting in the front row in the same order as they would sit during court sessions. The most recent photograph includes Ginsburg, Kennedy, Roberts, Thomas, Breyer, and the 4 most junior justices standing behind them, again in the same order as they would sit during court sessions: Kagan, Alito, Sotomayor, Gorsuch. In the justices' private conferences, current practice is for them to speak and vote in order of seniority, to begin with the Chief Justice first and end with the most junior Associate Justice. The most junior Associate Justice in these conferences is charged with any menial tasks the justices may require as they convene alone, such as answering the door of their conference room, serving beverages, and transmitting orders of the court to the clerk. Justice Joseph Story served the longest as junior justice, from February 3, 1812, to September 1, 1823, for a total of 4,228 days. Justice Stephen Breyer follows very closely behind, serving from August 3, 1994, to January 31, 2006, for a total of 4,199 days. Justice Elena Kagan comes in at a distant third, serving from August 6, 2010 to April 10, 2017, for a total of 2,439 days. Salary. As of 2017, Associate Justices are paid $251,800 and the Chief Justice $263,300. Article 3, Section 1 of the U.S. Constitution prohibits Congress from reducing the pay for incumbent justices. Once a justice meets age and service requirements, the justice may retire. Judicial pensions are based on the same formula used for federal employees, but a justice's pension, as with other federal courts judges, can never be less than their salary at the time of retirement. Judicial leanings. Although justices are nominated by the president in power, justices do not represent or receive official endorsements from political parties, as is accepted practice in the legislative and executive branches. Jurists are, however, informally categorized in legal and political circles as being judicial conservatives, moderates, or liberals. Such leanings, however, generally refer to legal outlook rather than a political or legislative one. The nominations of justices are endorsed by individual politicians in the legislative branch who vote their approval or disapproval of the nominated justice. Following the confirmation of Neil Gorsuch in 2017, the court consists of 5 justices appointed by Republican presidents and 4 appointed by Democratic presidents. It is popularly accepted that Chief Justice Roberts and Associate Justices Thomas, Alito, and Gorsuch, and, appointed by Republican presidents, comprise the court's conservative wing. Justices Ginsburg, Breyer, Sotomayor, and Kagan, appointed by Democratic presidents, comprise the court's liberal wing. Justice Kennedy, appointed by President Reagan, is generally considered a conservative who has occasionally voted with liberals, and up until Justice Scalia's death, he was often the swing vote that determined the outcome of cases divided between the conservative and liberal wings. Gorsuch had a track record as a reliably conservative judge in the 10th Circuit. Tom Goldstein argued in an article in Scotus Blog in 2010, that the popular view of the Supreme Court as sharply divided along ideological lines and each side pushing an agenda at every turn is in significant part a caricature designed to fit certain preconceptions. He pointed out that in the 2009 term, almost half the cases were decided unanimously, and only about 20% were decided by a 5-4 vote. Barely 1 in 10 cases involved the narrow liberal/conservative divide, fewer if the cases where Sotomayor recused herself are not included. He also pointed to several cases that defied the popular conception of the ideological lines of the court. Goldstein further argued that the large number of pro-criminal defendant summary dismissals, usually cases where the justices decide that the lower court significantly misapplied precedent and reverse the case without briefing or argument, were an illustration that the conservative justices had not been aggressively ideological. Likewise, Goldstein stated that the critique that the liberal justices are more likely to invalidate acts of Congress, show inadequate deference to the political process, and be disrespectful of precedent, also lacked merit. Thomas has most often called for overruling prior precedent, even if long-standing, that he views as having been wrongly decided, and during the 2009 term Scalia and Thomas voted most often to invalidate legislation. According to statistics compiled by Scotus Blog, in the 12 terms from 2000 to 2011, an average of 19 of the opinions on major issues, 22%, were decided by a 5-4 vote, with an average.
Please subscribe and thanks for watching.